I was standing guard when the wire started screaming. Not the men, the wire itself, twisting and shrieking under the weight of bodies throwing themselves against it in the dark. 200 yards of barbed fence shook like something alive, and behind it came a sound I'd never heard before, a roar that wasn't angry or desperate, just decided. I raised my rifle and couldn't see faces, only shapes moving through the dust under searchlights that swung wild and useless. My hands were shaking so bad I thought the Lee Enfield would slip right out of them. 3 hours earlier, I'd been drinking tea and complaining about the cold. Now I was watching 1,000 men charge toward us with nothing but tent pegs and baseball bats, knowing most of them wouldn't stop until we made them. That was August 5th, 1944, Cowra Prisoner Camp, New South Wales, middle of nowhere, Australia. I was 19 years old, 6 months into garrison duty with the 22nd Battalion. Not frontline infantry, not the blokes who stormed beaches or fought through jungles. I was guarding Japanese prisoners 3 hours west of Sydney in flat farmland that stretched forever in every direction. 900 Japanese soldiers and sailors, most captured in New Guinea and the Solomons. We had 80 men on duty that night. 80. We thought that was enough. The camp sat on open ground surrounded by wire fence and guard towers every 100 yards. 4 compounds separated by more wire, searchlights, 1 Vickers machine gun position near the main gate. We gave the prisoners baseball equipment, let them grow vegetables. They had religious ceremonies, exercise periods, better food than some of our boys got in field camps. The brass called it a model facility, said we were following Geneva Convention rules to the letter. Most of the guards were older blokes or fellas like me who'd been classified unfit for overseas service. I had a bum knee from a farm accident when I was 12. Signed up to fight Japanese in the jungle, ended up watching them play cricket in a dusty compound. By mid-44, the war had turned. Japan was losing badly. Thousands of their soldiers had been captured, and that was the problem nobody understood until it was too late. See, we thought surrender meant the same thing to them as it did to us. Relief, survival, a chance to go home when the war ended. But for them it was something else entirely. Dishonor, shame worse than death. They'd been taught that capture meant you'd failed your emperor, your family, your ancestors. Some of them had families back home who thought they were dead. Letters were censored or never sent. They existed in this strange limbo, alive but not living, trapped between 2 worlds that both rejected them. In late July, the camp administrators announced us they'd be separating prisoners by rank, moving enlisted men to another camp at Hay, 300 miles south. To us, it was just logistics. To them, it looked like we were preparing to execute the officers, or maybe send them somewhere worse. Nobody explained it properly. The translation was poor. Within days, the whole atmosphere changed. The prisoners went silent, stopped making eye contact, moved in coordinated groups during exercise periods. We noticed small things. Tent pegs going missing, fence posts sharpened on one end, whispered conversations that stopped when guards walked past. But we didn't put it together. We thought they were defeated men, harmless, resigned to waiting out the war in safety. I'd been on the night shift before. It was boring work, cold in the Australian winter, temperature dropping near freezing after midnight. You'd patrol the wire with your rifle, stamp your feet to keep warm, watch your breath cloud in the searchlights, and count the hours until your shift ended. That night, started the same. 10 o'clock, I drew my Lee Enfield and 20 rounds from the armory. Corporal Matthews briefed us, standard patrol, watch for movement, report anything unusual. The other guards were joking around, complaining about the cold, talking about weekend leave. Nobody seemed worried. By midnight, everything was quiet. Lights out in the compounds except for a few lanterns in the officers' section. I could hear the wind moving through the gum trees beyond the wire, the distant sound of sheep in the paddocks, nothing else. Around 1:30, I started noticing something wrong. Too quiet. Normally, you'd hear snoring, men coughing, the shuffle of someone getting up to use the latrine. But there was nothing. Just this heavy silence that pressed down like a weight. Then I heard it. Faint, rhythmic, like chanting, barely audible over the wind. I called it into the watchtower. They told me to keep alert but not to worry. Prisoners probably having some kind of religious ceremony. At 1:48, the searchlight operator reported movement in B block compound. Multiple figures moving between huts. The alarm bell still hadn't rung. Protocol required visual confirmation of an actual escape attempt. I moved toward the wire, hands numb on the rifle stock, every sense suddenly sharp and focused. The chanting grew louder. I could see shadows now, dozens of them moving in formation like they were lining up for roll call. Something in my gut twisted hard. Then at 1:50 exactly, the silence broke. A single cry in Japanese, high and piercing, then hundreds of voices roaring at once. The huts emptied in seconds. Prisoners flooded toward the wire, hundreds of men in white undershirts, some stripped completely naked, faces painted with dirt and ash, carrying clubs made from table legs, knives fashioned from tin cans, sharpened wooden stakes. The searchlight swung wildly. The klaxon finally started wailing. Guards were shouting contradictory orders, running toward positions, trying to form a line. I stood there frozen for maybe 3 seconds. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't an escape attempt. This was a human wave, bodies packed so tight you couldn't see the ground between them, all moving toward the wire at a dead run. The first wave hit the fence with a sound like thunder. Men threw themselves against it, grabbed the barbed wire with bare hands, used their own bodies as bridges for the men behind them. The wire sagged and snapped. Blood ran dark in the searchlights. The guard tower opened fire first. The crack of Lee Enfields, then the stutter of the Bren gun, muzzle flashes lighting up faces twisted in fury or concentration or something beyond any expression I'd ever seen. I raised my rifle, aimed at the mass of bodies. My finger found the trigger. I fired. The recoil kicked my shoulder. I worked the bolt, ejected the brass, chambered another round, fired again. I don't know if I hit anyone. There were too many targets. The noise was overwhelming. Gunfire constant, men screaming in Japanese and English and wordless animal sounds. The crash of bodies against wire, the crack of wood on bone. The wire gave way in 3 places. Prisoners poured through like water through a broken dam. Some charged straight at the guard positions. Others scattered toward the outer fence and the open countryside beyond. Some turned back toward their own huts in confusion or regret. I couldn't tell which. I fell back with 5 other guards toward the admin building, forming a firing line. Corporal Matthews took command, his voice cutting through the chaos. Aim low. Don't let them reach the armory. We fired in volleys, point and shoot, and work the bolt and shoot again. No time to aim carefully. Just put rounds down range and pray. The machine gun position near the gate jammed. I heard the crew shouting for help, then saw prisoners swarm the position. One guard went down, hit with a baseball bat swung like an axe. Another was dragged backward into the compound. I wanted to help them, but couldn't break the line. We just kept firing. My ears were ringing. The rifle barrel grew hot under my hands, spent casings piled at my feet. I saw a man running, young, unarmed, not charging us but sprinting for the outer fence and the dark countryside beyond it. He was maybe 50 yards away. I hesitated. Matthews saw me freeze. "Shoot him!" Standing orders. I raised the rifle, tracked him through the iron sights, squeezed the trigger. He went down hard, rolled, got up on a shattered leg, kept running on pure will for maybe 30 yards before collapsing face first in the dirt. I worked the bolt and found another target. The smell hit me then. Cordite and blood and human waste and sweat and dust all mixed together into something that burned my throat and made my eyes water. The sound never stopped. Constant gunfire, boots on gravel, metal scraping metal, the wet thud of bullets finding flesh, men screaming and dying and charging forward anyway. During a brief lull while I was reloading, I knelt down and looked at the nearest body. A boy, maybe, 17, barefoot, lying face down 3 feet from the wire with a wooden stake in his hand. Nails had been driven through the end of it. His fingers were still wrapped tight around it. That's when it clicked for me, the thing I hadn't understood until that moment. They weren't trying to escape. Most of them were running toward the guns, not away from them. They were forcing us to kill them. This wasn't a breakout. It was mass suicide by combat. They wanted to die fighting because dying in captivity was unbearable, and they needed us to make it happen. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical blow. I leaned over and vomited into the dirt, wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, stood up and kept firing because what else could I do? We were trapped in this thing now, guards and prisoners both, locked in a dance nobody wanted, but nobody could stop. By 3 in the morning, the initial assault was broken. Bodies lay everywhere. The wire was torn to shreds. Posts bent and twisted. Whole sections collapsed flat. Searchlights swept the countryside beyond the camp. Approximately 400 prisoners had made it past the outer fence and scattered across miles of open farmland. The rest were dead or wounded or hiding in the compounds. We formed pursuit parties, dogs, trucks, local police, farmers with shotguns volunteering to help hunt down escaped Japanese prisoners. I was assigned to a patrol moving northeast along the railway line. We found them in culverts and ditches, under bridges and haystacks, hiding in abandoned sheds. Some surrendered immediately when we found them, hands raised, no fight left. Others charged us with rocks or bare fists, forcing us to shoot them. One fellow slit his own throat with a piece of broken glass when he saw us coming. We tried to stop him, but he was too fast. Another hanged himself from a gum tree with his own belt, left a note in Japanese nobody could read until weeks later. It was an apology to his family. Near dawn, my patrol found a group of 12 prisoners in a sheep paddock, kneeling in a circle, singing something low and rhythmic. We approached with rifles ready. They didn't run, didn't attack, just kept singing. The sergeant ordered them to surrender. They didn't respond. Then one of them stood, pulled a sharpened piece of metal from his waistband, and cut his own throat. Just like that. Another followed, then another. We rushed forward, trying to stop it, wrestling men to the ground, taking away their makeshift blades. But 3 died before we could intervene. I ended up holding pressure on a man's neck wound, my hand slick with blood, feeling his pulse weaken under my fingers. His eyes went distant and glassy. He whispered something in Japanese that sounded like a prayer or maybe a name. I told him to hold on, told him we had medics coming, even though I knew he couldn't understand me and probably didn't want to be saved anyway. He died 30 seconds later. I was 19 years old, and I'd never watched anyone die slowly before. It felt different than the shooting, more intimate, more permanent. By 9 in the morning, it was over. 231 Japanese prisoners dead. Most killed by guards, some by suicide, a few from injuries in the wire. 108 wounded, 334 recaptured, 4 Australian guards killed, 4 more mortally wounded. The camp looked like a battlefield, wire shredded, buildings scarred with bullet holes, blood soaked into the dust everywhere you looked. They laid the dead out in rows and covered them with blankets. Medics worked through the morning, Japanese prisoners and Australian doctors side by side, trying to save the wounded without speaking the same language. The prisoners who survived were silent, hollow-eyed. Some wept quietly, others stared at nothing, catatonic with shock or grief or shame. Civilians from Cowra arrived at the gates, demanding to know why they hadn't been warned, why Japanese prisoners were kept so close to town. The brass locked everything down. Military police came in to investigate. They wanted to know how it happened, who planned it, whether any guards were complicit. They weren't. It was just understaffing and underestimation and not understanding what we were really guarding. They decided to bury the Japanese dead with military honors in a mass grave at Cowra Cemetery. Controversial decision. Some people thought it was wrong, honoring enemy soldiers on Australian soil. But the commanders insisted. Geneva Convention. I was assigned to the burial detail. We dug, carried bodies wrapped in canvas, lowered them into the earth one by one. I saw their faces up close for the first time. Young men, old men, boys with peach fuzz on their chins, men with gray in their hair, farmers, fishermen, soldiers, just blokes. A Japanese Buddhist priest, a prisoner who'd survived the breakout, performed a ceremony. He chanted sutras, placed flowers, wept openly while he prayed. Some of the Australian guards removed their hats and stood at attention. Others turned away, unable or unwilling to participate. I stood somewhere between both groups, feeling nothing and everything at once, too tired to know what I felt. The camp stayed open until 46, but everything changed. Reinforced wire, triple the guards, constant surveillance. The breakout made international news for about 2 weeks, then vanished as the war in Europe intensified. The survivors were eventually repatriated to Japan after the war ended. Many refused to go home at first, afraid of what waited for them. Some stayed in Australia, working as laborers under assumed names, living quiet lives and never speaking about what happened. Others went back and were ostracized, branded cowards for surviving when they should have died. The 4 Australian soldiers who died that night were buried with full honors. Private Benjamin Hardy, 22. Private Ralph Jones, 25. Private Charles Shepard, 29. Lieutenant Harry Doncaster, 41. Their names were in the papers briefly, then forgotten. The 22nd Garrison Battalion was quietly disbanded in 45. Most of us requested transfers to combat units overseas, anything to get away from garrison duty, from the memory of what we'd done. I was discharged in 46. Went back to my family's farm in Victoria. Never spoke about Cowra to anyone except my wife. Once, 30 years later, after a nightmare woke me screaming. She held me until I stopped shaking, asked if I wanted to talk about it. I told her some of it, not all. Some things you can't share because the words don't exist to make someone understand who wasn't there. They built a memorial at Cowra after the war. Japanese garden, stone lanterns, cherry trees that bloom every spring. It's peaceful now. I went back once in '89, stood at the grave where we buried them, read the names carved into stone, 231 of them. I remembered maybe a dozen faces. The rest were just shapes in the dark, shadows under searchlights. The boy with the wooden stake, the man singing in the paddock. People ask me sometimes if I think about it, if it bothers me. I tell them the truth. I don't think about it every day anymore, but I've never stopped thinking about it. There's a difference. It's like a scar that doesn't hurt unless you press on it. And some days you can't help pressing. I don't regret what we did that night. We were soldiers. We had orders. If we hadn't fired, they would have killed us. And then God knows what they'd have done to the town. But I also know we were part of something that shouldn't have happened. Something that broke men so badly they chose death over waiting. That's not military strategy. That's despair. The Japanese fellas we buried weren't monsters. They weren't heroes either. They were just blokes caught in a machine bigger than any of us, told things that made sense in one world and no sense at all in another. When they came through that wire, they were trying to take back the only thing they thought they had left, the right to choose how they died. I don't forgive them for what they did. I don't forgive myself for what I did either. Forgiveness isn't the point. The point is that it happened, and we lived through it, and now it's our job to remember it right. Not as a lesson, not as a story with a moral, just as a thing that was true and terrible and human. I'm 94 years old now. Most of the blokes I served with are dead. The prisoners are dead. Even their children are old. But that night is still happening somewhere in my head. The wire still screaming, the searchlights still swinging wild across the dark. I don't know what that means. I just know it's mine to carry until I'm not here to carry it anymore. That's all. That's the truth. That's Cowra.